Hi guys, it's Thompson here. This is a revision video for the poem Kamikaze by Beatrice Garland. So before we get into analysing the poem and looking at the poem in detail, here's a quick reminder of some of the general advice for revision. Remember, don't focus on what you can't do. You are not expected to teach yourself new material. Remember, revision is all about going over past material to embed it. If there is anything that you come across that you're unsure of or don't understand, please do make a note of it and let me know when we're in school, and I'll be happy to help you with any of that. Okay, next thing, use this time to revise and prepare revision materials. Remember, these will be incredibly useful to you throughout Year 11. Also, when revising, try to use a variety of different activities. You might decide just to do online tasks through Seneca or Sam Learning one day, and then try some written work the next day, followed by a day of making written materials. Try to keep it vague so it doesn't become boring. There are some set tasks on our Q drive available in the shared area, which should help aid your revision whilst at home. Remember, you can find these on the Q drive. There is also Sam Learning and also Seneca Learning, which you have been given your go to by your teacher. Remember, revisiting prior learning when it comes to poetry, it is important to reread the 15 poems from Power and Conflict cluster. These are available to you in your AQA anthology. You may want to select 3 key quotations from each poem. You can then create revision cards for these and learn them by heart. Remember, it is a closed book exam. Therefore, you will not use your poetry anthology and all of your annotations to help you with your responses. Therefore, it is important that you know quotations on each of the 15 poems. You can then make notes on how these 15 poems can be linked together and why. Remember, in your exam, you'll be given one poem by the exam board. However, you will be asked to link this and compare this poem thematically with one of your choice from the 15 poems. It is really important that you understand each of the poems. BBC Bite Size is a really good starting point if you don't have your anthology with you, as all the poems are listed. Remember, choose one poem at a time to focus on and make sure you're able to do the following. So, can you briefly explain what the poem is about? Remember, for those AO1 skills, it's really important to know what the poem is about and that you're able to make points relating to the question. Next thing that's very important is, can you link the poem to different scene ideas? Then can you choose and annotate and learn 3 quotations, creating them into revision cards? And to challenge yourself a little bit further, can you explore wider reading and textual information? There are new resources in the home learning folder to help you with this. Right then, it's time to look at the poem in a little bit of depth. Before we start to analyse the poem together, what I want you to do is, as I read through the poem, I want you to make a note of any of the phrases or words that stand out to you, or can you identify any of the techniques used by Garland on our initial reading. Kamikaze by Beatrice Garland. Her father embarked at sunrise, with a flask of water, a samurai sword in the cockpit, and a shaven head full of powerful incantations, and enough fuel for a one-way journey into history. But halfway there, she thought, recounting it later to her children, he must have looked far down at the little fishing boat strung out like bunting on a green-blue translucent sea, and beneath them, arcing in waves like a huge flag, waved first one way, then the other in a figure of 8. The dark shoals of fishes, flashing silver of their bellies, swim towards the sun. Remember how he and his brothers waiting on the shore, built cairns of grey pebbles to see who was stood the longest, the turbulent inrush of breakers, bringing their father's boat safe. Yes, grandfather's boat, safe to the shore, salt sodden, awash with cloud-marked mackerel, black crabs, feathery prawns, the loose silver of whitebait, and once a tuna, the dark prince, muscular, dangerous. And though he came back, my mother never spoke again in his presence, nor did she meet his eyes, and the neighbour too. It treated him as though he no longer existed. Only we children still chatted and laughed, till gradually we too learned to be silent, to live as though he never returned, that this was no longer the father we loved. And sometimes, she said, he must have wondered which had been the better way to die. So, looking at the poem then, who is Beatrice Garland? Well, Beatrice Garland is still alive and well, and she currently lives in London. And she works as a clinician and a researcher for the NHS alongside writing her poetry. Kamikaze, the poem, was first published in 2013 as part of her first poetry collection called The Invention of Fireworks. So in order to write about the poem, you need to know what the poem is about. The poem opens with a kamikaze pilot setting off on his mission. Kamikaze pilots were specifically trained Japanese pilots who were used towards the end of World War II. They flew their planes on suicide missions into enemy ships. It was seen as a great honour to serve your country in this way. However, in the poem, it becomes clear that the pilot has turned round and didn't complete his mission. His daughter imagines this was because on the way he saw the beauty of nature and it enabled him to remember his innocent childhood. Upon his return home, the pilot was then shunned. Even his family acted as if he wasn't there. So let's have a look at the form, structure and language techniques used in the poem. So let's start with form. The poem is largely narrated in third person, using reported speech of the pilot's daughter, but her voice is directly heard in later stanzas. The absence of the pilot's own voice could have been to show that he's been cut off from society, and the use of the third person emphasises the distance between the pilot and his daughter and the rest of his family. In terms of the structure, the first 5 stanzas form only one sentence, which covers an account of the pilot's flight as the pilot's daughter imagines it. The end of the sentence represents the plane landing, and the final 2 stanzas deal with fallout of the pilot's actions. With the poem, a lot of irony is used. There are ironic reminders of how the pilot has abandoned his mission. The way he's treated when he returns to his family is ironic, because they act as if he's dead, even though he was the one who chose not to die as a suicide pilot. The imagery which is used in the poem is quite natural, and things such as stills, metaphors, and detailed descriptions are used by the poet to emphasise the beauty and power of nature. Therefore, when you're comparing this poem by a theme, it is important to know how the power of nature is conveyed. Therefore, if you're comparing the power of nature, you may want to compare this poem to poems such as the Prelude. Moving back to language, there is a lot of direct speech, which makes poems seem more personal. We are, as readers, hearing the daughter's voice, and this emphasises the impact of war and how it affects families. Therefore, you could also look at the impact of war and compare this to the poem of Poppy. Let's start to look at the poem stanza by stanza. So the poem has 7 stanzas in total, And stanza 1 creates a sense of journey, but the title suggests that it will be a journey to his death. So, for example, we've got the word embark, which further emphasises that this is going to be a journey. We've then got the image of sunrise. So, sunrise in Japan is very symbolic, as Japan is known as the land of the rising sun. So this almost might be not only a timestamp of when his journey began, but also a nod to Japanese culture and a reference to the location. Further on down the stanza, he embarks his journey with a head full of powerful incantations. This suggests by the use of the word incantations that the pilot is under a kind of spell, and it hints at the influence of patriotic propaganda that the Kamikazes were exposed to. They were told that it was a great honour to die for their country, and therefore this quote links to the feeling and attitude of patriotism. So again, this opening stanza is full of suggestions of patriotic pride and duty. The pilot has a chance to fly into history and be known as brave and give life for his country. This is again shown in the reaction of his family and neighbours upon his return. They treat him as dead as he has failed his duty to his nation. In the second stanza, it starts with the word but, and it suddenly changes direction. Even though the plane is still flying, it's going to turn around. And again, we've got the phrase she thought. This again highlights that it is not the pilot's own thoughts, but his daughter's. The pilot here has no voice, and his real reasons for turning back won't be heard and will never be heard. We see that the daughter is recounting it to her children in later life, and she's reminiscing on what she thinks made her father come back, looking at little fishing boats strung out like bunting. The simile here is homely and pretty, and it's a far cry from the war. So again, we have these contrasting images. Bunting itself is associated with celebrations, which makes this image ironic. There is no victorious return for the pilot, and when he does return, even though he shouldn't, there is no celebration of his heroic bravery. The stanza ends with a beautiful image of nature on green-blue translucent sea, again linking to natural imagery and how it's used to emphasise the beauty and power of nature. In this case, the image of looking down has so much power, the nature has so much power over the pilot that it triggers his action to turn back. Looking at stanza 3, we yet again have another simile used by Garland, like a huge flag waved further one way. So the simile here is symbolic. So flags are a symbol of national identity. Here the simile hints at the way flags can be used to stop or direct something. So again, the shoal of fish are flagging him down. They're trying to change his course in direction. And again, we've got that hint at national identity, that hint of patriotism through this quotation. We then go on through the rest of the stanza to have lots of repeated sibilants, shoals, fishes, fillets, swiveled. So the repeated sibilant sounds here reflect the smooth movement of fish in the water. We then move on to stanza 4. And the focus switches here to the pilot's childhood memories. and remembered how he and his brothers waiting on the shore. So again, we've got lovely natural imagery here. Built cans of pearl grey pebbles. Again, these are innocent childhood activities, which again contrasts with the pilot's job later on in life of going to war. Stanza 4 includes enjambment, and the lack of punctuation in this stanza may hint that the pilot got caught up in his childhood memories. They're just flowing through his mind, flowing out of his brain with no real stop. We then end with bringing their father safe. So again, we've got the repetition in stanza 4 and in stanza 5 of the word safe. Okay, this is hinting at the pilot's mindset. He doesn't want his children to go through the pain of losing him, to go through the pain of losing a parent, of grieving. And we also get the interjection of direct speech here in stanza 5. Yes, grandfather goat. So it sounds like the pilot's daughter is answering a question from her children, that they're asking her questions about her their grandfather's experience. Again, in the stanza, with lots of natural imagery. And we have listing of sea creatures here. So we've got mackerel, prawns, crab, whitebait, tuna. Again, all of these sea creatures are given extra description. With effect to the list, it highlights their beauty and their significance to the pilot, and perhaps in how they are persuasive in making the pilot turn round. The stanza ends on a metaphor. The tuna is described as the dark prince. And also muscular and dangerous. Describing the tuna in such a way also reminds the readers that nature can be dangerous and the dangers of nature itself. Stanza 5 also ends on the poem's first full stop, which signifies the end of the daughter's storytelling. It signifies the end of the flight. It should have ended it, but instead, the last two stanzas, the pilot returns to his family. And then in the last two stanzas, we finally hear the daughter's voice in direct speech again. She speaks in more factual, descriptive ways about her father's life. And this hints at her peace and her sympathy with him. We also see irony in this stanza. Even though he came back, they treat him as though he no longer existed. There is irony in this because he survived. But whether his family, friends, his acquaintances still treat him as though he had died. In the final stanza, we get the final short sentence, and this could be a comment on the destructiveness of paganism. The pilot's family are so ashamed they treat him as he is dead. He wished he'd fulfilled his mission. Either way, his story ends in some kind of death, be that a metaphorical or literal death. And again, we've got this hint through the boat that this was no longer the father we loved. So this hints at how the pilot has been changed by his experience, how this has affected him. Okay, now that we've looked at the poem in a little bit more detail. Here are some suggested revision activities that you can get on with whilst you are revising at home. So you could start by summarising what the poem is about in 4 sentences. As previously mentioned in this video, it is important that you know what the poem is about so that you can analyse it and write about it during your exam. You then want to annotate the poem with points you can remember from your initial study. So even though you have a full annotated anthology, you cannot take this into the exam with you. Part of your revision should be having a look at a blank copy of the poem, annotating it with points you can remember from your initial study. From that, you then may want to select 3 or 4 quotations which you either like the look of or you can link to thematically. You can then explore them. Remember, when you're exploring quotation, you will explore multiple connotations of the individual words in the quotation, and just also identify any obvious techniques, metaphors, similes, and powerful verbs. Once you've done that, you can then start to look at the poem's form. Can you say anything about it? How does it appear on the page? You can then move on to structure. So how has Garland structured the ideas within? How are ideas ordered? A hint to do this is to look at the lack of punctuation in the first few stanzas. Where is the full stop and why? How are the italics used? And what is the third person count? A really important part of your exam is how you can link the poem to context, so AO3. So you may want to do some further textual research. You may want to find out about the life of World War II Japanese kamikaze pilots. You could explore what their targets were and how they were recruited. Remember, patriotism is a really important theme and portrayal in this poem. So researching the concepts of patriotism and propaganda will help make links. You could start with the British Library website and the resources in the home learning folder. As previously mentioned, it is really important that you are able to make links between Kamikaze and other poems in the anthology thematically. So you may want to start to think about how this poem can be linked to any of the other power and conflict poems. Remember, they're all linked by the theme of power and conflict. However, you must be much more specific in the links that you are making. For example, this poem clearly shows the effects of conflict on families and the soldiers. So you could start to think about which other poems also contain this idea. If you have any questions or require any support on this poem or any of the others from the Power and Conflict anthology, please feel free to email me at any time. You may also want to send me any pictures of your revision resources that you have made so I can see how you've been getting on with these. In the meantime, happy revising.